Those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The global issue of Israel-Palestine is being played out at the community level in Brooklyn, New York. A vote is set Tuesday at the Park Slope Food Co-op to decide whether to hold a referendum on boycotting goods from Israel to protest the Israeli government's policies towards Palestinians. The debate has divided many in the co-op. The turnout at the vote is expected to be so large that organizers have shifted the meeting from its usual location at a synagogue, which accommodates 350 people, to a venue that can hold about 3,000. The attempt at a boycott is part of an international advocacy effort called the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Campaign, or BDS for short. It's inspired by the international boycott movement against apartheid South Africa. In the struggle to abolish apartheid, a coalition of Palestinian civil society groups called for people all over the world to engage in a nonviolent campaign to boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel until it complies with international law. Well, much like the Israel-Palestine issue globally, members of the Park Slope Food Co-op have conflicting views on the boycott at home. Democracy Now! Spoke to members of the Park Slope Food Co-op last night.
I support the 2005 Palestinian civil society call for boycott and divestment and sanctions of Israel until they end the occupation, equal rights for Palestinians inside Israel, and provide right of return, support right of return for Palestinian refugees. So it's part of an international movement. I support that movement, and I think where we get our food is extremely political.
I do not support the boycott of Israeli products. If you really believe in helping the Palestinian people, this isn't going to do this. Because if it potentially can hurt the Palestinians and their work potential, and I think that if we really want to stand up and say that we want peace, then we should make a statement about pushing for there to be better talks. So I think we have to decide what our real intent is. Is it anti-Israel or is it pro-peace?
Linda Katz and Jessica Rosenberg, members of the Park Slope Food Co-op, speaking to Democracy Now! Last night outside the co-op. Well, today we'll host a debate on the wider BDS movement, the call to boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel. Dr. Mustafa Barghouti is joining us from Washington, D.C. He supports the movement. He's a member of the Palestinian Parliament. He's the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. He was also a presidential candidate in the 2005 elections. Rabbi Arthur Waskow is opposed to BDS, founder and director of the Shalom Center in Philadelphia. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Professor Barghouti, why don't you start off by explaining what BDS is and why you think this vote in Brooklyn, New York, is so important?
Well, BDS is a part of a larger movement of nonviolent resistance in Palestine, civil resistance, very similar to the civil actions and civil activities that were led by Martin Luther King here in the United States against the segregation, and very similar to what Gandhi led in India as a nonviolent resistance against for independence of India. What we live in as Palestinians is a situation of apartheid and segregation, an occupation that has become the longest in modern history, and this segregation is destroying our life. The talks, the so-called peace talks, have become a peace process that is a substitute to peace. It's not producing any results. It has become a cover for Israeli expansionist policy of settlement activity that is destroying the very last opportunity of two-state solution. And there can be no results of talks as long as there is no balance between the two sides. And as long as there is no change in the balance of power. And the whole nonviolent movement is about changing the balance, about producing a new situation which would allow a solution and allow peace to take place. BDS, Boycott, Divestment, Sanction Campaign, is one way of international solidarity with the Palestinian people, as was the case of BDS with the struggle of the people of South Africa against apartheid. It's nonviolent, it's peaceful. It's not against Israelis as Israelis, it's against Israeli occupation, against Israeli apartheid, and against Israeli segregation. At the end of the day, we believe this campaign is for the sake of both Palestinians and Israelis, because it would help us liberate ourselves from the last segregation and occupation system in the world, and it would help liberate the Israelis from the last colonial settler system in modern history. Without Palestinians being free, Israelis themselves will not be free. And that's why a BDS movement in a place like the United States can help also change the United States policy, as has happened in the case of the struggle of the people of South Africa against apartheid system.
Rabbi Arthur Waskow, founder and director of the Shalom Center in Philadelphia, why are you opposed to BDS?
Well, first, Amy, let me say shalom, salam, peace to you, to Dr. Barghouti. And I want to say, Dr. Barghouti, for me, you are a respected, important, and creative leader of the Palestinian people. And I think the BDS movement, as it is presently shaped and framed, is a mistake. It targets all of Israeli society, which is not a way of enacting in the present a future in which, as I know you have said you believe, there should be a two-state solution. You mentioned Dr. King. Even when Dr. King clearly, publicly, vigorously opposed the Vietnam War, he did not call for a boycott of all American products and producers. He didn't do that in Europe or in the United States. He targeted where he was aiming. And I think BDS, as presently framed, doesn't target. I myself don't buy products produced by Israeli settlers on the West Bank. And I encourage others not to do that. But that's a laser beam boycott. That's a boycott of the oppressive acts of the Israeli government and of settlers on the West Bank. It is not a demonization of Israeli society as a whole. And it seems to me that the present framing of BDS, that it aims at all Israeli institutions and processes and products, and that it talks about not only ending the occupation, but, for example, it seems to be talking about the return of millions of descendants, families of refugees to within the legitimate boundaries of Israel. I think that adds up to an attack on the legitimacy of Israel as a whole. You may not intend that, but I know that you have called for a two-state solution, but the result of the way BDS is framed on almost everyone I've talked to who feels attracted to it is that the society as well as the government of Israel is wrong and it must be attacked. That, I think, even using methods that are not outright violence is not a nonviolent approach.
We're going to go to break, and we're going to come back to this discussion. Just 30 seconds. Rabbi Arthur Waskow is with the Shalom Center in Philadelphia. Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, member of the Palestinian Parliament, Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative, and a presidential candidate in the 2005 elections. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in 30 seconds. Music by Nadia Mohsen. Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Our guests are Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who is in Washington, D.C. right now, and Arthur Waskow, who is in Philadelphia, the Rabbi Arthur Waskow of the Shalom Center. Before we continue the debate, I wanted to ask Dr. Mustafa Barghouti about Hana Shalabi, the Palestinian hunger striker protesting the Israeli policy of administrative detention on hunger strike for 39 49 days. This past weekend, the Israeli military court rejected her appeal. Shalabi was detained February 16th. The military court initially ordered her held for 6 months. That was later reduced to 4 months, a decision she unsuccessfully appealed. The Israeli army has said the 30-year-old is a global jihad-affiliated operative and was rearrested on suspicion that she posed a threat to the area, but no charges have been filed against her. No specific allegations have been made public. Dr. Barghouti, can you talk about her case and how it compares to the international outcry around Khadr Adnan, who was also on hunger strike for some 66 days? Ultimately, the Israeli government agreed to free him. He will be freed in mid-April.
Well, the case of Hana Shalabi resembles the suffering and the oppression that Palestinians are subjected to. Hana Shalabi was released in the exchange deal which led to the release of Shalit. According to the agreement, the Israeli army has no right to rearrest her again. She was rearrested, and there were no specific charges against her, so she was put under what they call administrative detention, which is a regulation that Israel used from the old British mandatory laws that were cancelled in Britain. And this law allows Israel to arrest any Palestinian for an unlimited amount of time without charges. There are people who have been in Israeli jail for more than 6 years without charges under this administrative detention. Hana Shalabi, like Khadr Adnan, decided to challenge this regulation by going into one of the most peaceful acts that can be done, which is hunger strike. Khadr Adnan, as you said, was on hunger strike for 66 days. His life was under very big threat till the Israelis bent down and decided to release him in April. Hana Shalabi is on her 40th day, but her health is very fragile and she can die at any moment. And unfortunately, the Israeli government is very stubborn and is refusing to release her and continues to violate international law by what they are doing. I want to add that today on hunger strike in solidarity with Hana and against administrative detention. And I think what we need today is a very strong solidarity with Hana Shalabi to save her life. And if you allow me, I want to respond to some of the issues that Rabbi Waskow has mentioned. I respect him. I thank him for his good intentions. But let me say that when he speaks about boycotting settlement products only, let me tell him that this is a very difficult thing to do, because it is not possible anymore to differentiate between settlement products and usual Israeli products, because the settlers and the Israeli government is recycling the Israeli settlement products within Israeli companies. So practically, you cannot differentiate between settlement products and Israeli products. And what we are doing is not delegitimization. Practically, those who delegitimize Israel are those who are conducting the process of apartheid, those who are consolidating a system of segregation, those who are continuing an occupation for more than 46 years, making it the longest military occupation in human history. Those are the ones who are delegitimizing Israel, and those are the ones who are delegitimizing the future of two-state solution. And what we need here is to be effective. The Boycott, Divestment, Sanction campaign is part of a nonviolent resistance act, and it's part of making this nonviolent resistance effective. Because at the end of the day, if we don't change the balance of power on the ground, nothing will change. And what we hope for here is that people would understand, especially people like Rabbi Waskow, who is supporting peace, that time has come to pressure Israel. In front of my eyes and his eyes, Israel is continuing to kill the two-state solution by building settlements. What can be done to stop these actions? We have to be effective, and that's why BDS becomes an important international instrument side by side with the Palestinian nonviolent resistance, which is growing everywhere in the occupied territories in the best traditions of Gandhi and Martin Luther King.
Rabbi Arthur Waskow, if you could respond, and also would you describe Israeli policies in the Palestinian territories as apartheid, similar to the system in apartheid South Africa?
In the occupied territories, the Israeli government's policies are disgusting and probably analogous to apartheid. But I want to point out that the 2 hunger strikes were pointed like laser beams at